So for the exams, please note you cannot pause your exams on Canvas. You cannot pause them. Once you start it, you have to go with it. You're committed and you have to finish it out. So find a time that works best for you within the 48-hour gap that you have for taking the exam. Now, please note, when I say 48 hours, that means those are options. I'm not giving you 48 hours to actually take the exam, right? I'm giving you a time gap that you can find that works best for you, for your work, for your family, whatever responsibilities you may have. That is what I'm trying to mention, okay? As soon as you enter and you hit submit, you will automatically get feedback to you'll find your grade. Now remember, let's talk a little bit about grades. Let's say there are 30 questions and you got all of them right. It will say 30 out of 30. And then if you go to your grade book into Canvas, you will see that the percentage is 100. So at that time, you have an A. Let's say you scored, you have 29. And you're like, what is that percent? All you have to do is go to Canvas and you'll see your percent. So all your grade questions, they're all already answered for you. You don't have to do any of the math. You don't have to email me. If you still like to email me, you're welcome, but it's all there for you. It's all there. Immediately added into your gradebook. Okay. Now remember, the Launchpad is not, I do not like to sync it in. I like to keep it separate so I can focus on that so by itself. And then I get all the total points toward the end of the semester on your Launchpad, and then I enter it into the gradebook. So let's say it's 1,000 points in Launchpad and you have 900, it'll say 900 out of 1,000. But I like it one data point. In case something goes wrong, and it has, something goes wrong in your Launchpad, we can work on it together. But once we start populating that gradebook on Canvas, it gets very large and I have 12 classes. Can you imagine how many students I have? That's a lot of students. And I have to, it's like I'm running a small company, addressing students, having the meetings, addressing issues and other stuff. So it's cranking out our assignments and stuff like that, exams. So I can't I can't study the gradebook and run stats on it all the time. So that's the reason for it. All right, with that said, we're gonna jump into your PowerPoint on chapter 2. You're right, we did do a freestyle of it all, and that's, I guess, go ahead.
I believe we did see the PowerPoint. I apologize, I said no.
Think so? Okay. Well, I'm just gonna go through it just to be on the safe side. I'm gonna share screen. But you're right. I do think we did. But you know what? We'll give it a quick go, and it'll be like a little refresher or recap. That's what we'll call it. And we talked about chemistry. Some of us have a pretty good already idea with that whole briefly freestyle, because I remember now the PowerPoint was not loading up. It was just spinning. So we're gonna do a few things here. We're gonna talk briefly about what do we define as life. And when we talk about that, well, it's an interesting thing because our definition, I think, applies to Earth. It's what we know to be life. Maybe something else, somewhere else, may be living, but under a different set of rules. Who knows? So what we apply may not apply in other planets. And that's why it says, does this definition apply when we search for life on other planets? I think that's a yes and no. Now, of course, we're not going to look at a rock on Mars and pick it up and say, I wonder if this is living. No. We're not really talking about that. We're talking more about the specifics. how does matter organize into the molecules? How is it organized into molecules of living organisms? So briefly right there, when we're talking about at least us, let's say humans, we go through kind of a level. So we go from subatomic particles like the protons, the neutrons, the electrons, they make an atom. A group of 2 or more atoms then make molecules. Molecules end up making organelles, which are the organs of cells. A bunch of cells together then make tissues. A group of tissues then make an organ. Groups of organs make an organ system. An organ system then makes a human. So that is the organizational structure, at least for humans, dogs, cats, and other organisms like that. That does not apply to bacteria or viruses. What is the basic structure unit of life, and what are the properties? And why is water so important for life and living organisms? So these are some of the things we'll be talking about here. If you've probably looked into, or hope you're somewhat into politics a little bit, I think when people say, are you into politics? There's usually a negative feeling that comes with that. And that's perfectly acceptable, because for quite some time, when we hear the word politics, it's a lot of fighting, right? And that's what we hear and stuff. So we feel, or we're shy and we don't want to say it. But I think, again, as I talked to you before, it's important to be involved in policies. That's how I look at it versus politics. Or maybe you're not leaning to one particular party or the other, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be interested in the intended policies that a candidate or sitting elected official may have, even including your communities, from local, state, and federal. The reason I say this is because if you've been keeping up with a little bit of policies, you'll note that the current administration has drastically pushed for space, big time. So they've even created a new branch of government that's involved in space. I forgot what it was called, and they have a new flag for it, everything. And I think it's interesting. I think that's an interesting thing. I mentioned that because we're going to talk a little bit about Mars. I personally, I think that's great from a national security point of view, right? Because we always want to seek the high ground in terms of defense. Let's say if you're going to the Army, some of my students do, you'll be taught early on in the Army or Marines that you want to get to the high ground. You don't want to be the low ground, and while you're trying to attack an enemy, or the enemy's attacking you, you don't want to be low. So, going into space is a pretty good advantage point, right? So a few nations are competing for that, to get that high ground. Okay. Now, however, though, and I think space exploration is great, but, and this is just my humble opinion, I think the ocean, I think we really need to look into the ocean more, because a large part of that has not been explored due to its depths. And I think we put a lot of effort into that, and also the rainforest, because as we know of it now, with all our current knowledge, and it's limited, but we don't have a planet that's not even close to Earth within our reach, as far as we know. We don't. We have our planet, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think we need to take care of the one that we have. And we should look into, like, the Amazon, where there's a lot of amazing things that have been discovered there. We need to work and help the individuals there, so we can try to preserve it and provide them economic means so they don't have to do deforestation, right? And provide that Brazilian government the resources and come as a collection of individuals. And I think the ocean it's a lot of life there too. Who knows what we can find that can help aid the human species. But again, I find a space very interesting, but that's just my opinion in terms of, this is biology. So this is what we're talking about. So let's get back into taking a look at Mars. And we're, so here they say there may, I'm gonna put may be evidence of an ancient freshwater lake? Now, maybe some of the individuals in NASA, they know more about this and maybe they have more data than me. And they're like, no, it was a lake of water. Okay, sure. Then I'm going to be like, I'm just going to say, all right. But right now, based on what I'm looking at, based on my data, like I haven't been there, I didn't gather the evidence. I'm going to say that there may be evidence that indicates that there was a freshwater lake on Mars. Okay. So, and the thing is that here are some of the things you can see here, that some aqueous solution. You can see here that something flowed. Something flowed here. Now, down here, I'm assuming that the samples had weathering that is indicative of flow, of some sort of fluid. We're gonna, in this case, they're stating maybe water, right? But we're not 100% sure. We don't have a sample of water, so we're just gonna assume what we do know, that it was some aqueous fluid running through. If you've ever been to a place where water is flowing or has flown, the rocks will be nicely smooth. They will not be jagged. They'll be smooth rocks. This is where Curiosity landed, or its landing site. Here are some things that have clay and sulfite hydrous mineral deposits. Again, canals carved out, and fine sedimentary rock weathered by standing water. Okay, so these are some things that we say that there are evidence to lean us toward the possibility that, hey, there was a body of water or some kind of liquid. So here is the route. Here's where Curiosity landed, and then it's traveled, and this is an area of 5 miles, then it traveled all the way this way. Now here is your selfie. Here, see the little arm right here, right? So this is Curiosity taking its first selfie on Mars. Well, that's pretty cool. That's something none of us can say that we've ever done. So do you have any questions in terms of this here? Because we're just talking about possibility of life. And I think it's super cool that we can send this technology to that planet, and it could move around and collect and take pictures and gather data and then stream it back to us. It's really pretty cool stuff. All right. Here's something kind of what I was leaning to. I'm just going to read it to you. It says, our experience with life is limited to familiar Earth life. And we know that all known life on Earth descends from a last universal common ancestor. So kind of what we were talking about. So here's something you need to know, that there are five properties that define something that is alive. Things that are alive need to grow. Things that are alive need to reproduce. Even a bacteria, it needs to reproduce. Homeostasis, right? In our bodies, we must maintain our temperature. We don't want to get too cold. We don't want to get too hot. We must maintain blood pressure, or blood glucose, all these different things, our hormone levels, homeostasis. We must be able to sense and respond to stimuli. So not just humans, but even this plant will respond. If you've seen a tree growing at an angle, it's responding to sunlight, so it can do photosynthesis and turn some of that energy into sugar molecules, so it can have use that for energy. So sun energy turn into sugars. So it can sense, it can respond. Now we have really good senses as human species. We're able to feel touch, we're able to move to one side or run away, or all these different things that we can respond. It's raining, we'll try to seek some shelter and get out of the rain, right? But even a plant can respond to stimuli. Now, then there is the ability to obtain and use energy. In the case of the plant, is obtaining energy from the sun and converting some of that energy into sugars. In the case of this lady here, she has an apple and she is going to utilize that apple in the form and utilize it in metabolism, which is all the chemical reactions in the body combined. So metabolism, all the reactions in the body that involve catabolic, the breaking, and anabolic is the making, okay? So ana makes, kata breaks. Now, let's briefly talk about a mule. A mule. The offspring of a female horse and a male donkey is alive, but it cannot reproduce. It is sterile. Fire can grow, fires reproduce, fires use energy. And in terms of reproduce, you're like, what do you mean they reproduce? Yeah, let's say an amber, you start doing a fire and there's some wind and some from that ambers fly up into the air and they land somewhere else and they reproduce. Or let's say the fire goes out, it starts to drizzle, the drizzling stops, the wind comes in, provides the oxygen, and the fire starts again. And it utilizes energy, but is not alive. If scientists found an alien specimen with only a few of these traits, would it be considered alive? What do you think? If we found an alien specimen, and there's not a right or wrong, it's up to you. Based on these 5 things and what we know, we find some alien specimen, right? Alien meaning it is foreign. It's not from here. But it doesn't have one of the 5. What do you think? How would you classify it?
I think it would be considered alive because maybe there's stuff that's beyond our knowledge or that we can understand.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's pretty good point. Anybody else want to jump in?
I think that
And
as long as it follows like the guidelines to consider something to be alive, then it's up for debate that it's alive or not.
also, you're saying like maybe if it has 4 of the 5 things that we consider living and one of them's missing, then you're saying, hey, well,
It could be considered as alive or not.
yeah, let's debate it. Okay,
Yeah.
I like that. Good point.
I agree too. That if
Okay,
it
good.
has all 5 or majority of the properties
Mhm.
of determining that something is alive, then it should be considered alive. Like we shouldn't be closed-minded to that idea.
Okay. So who's the student, the male student that was talking about if it meets more approximately 4, it could be up to debate? I was just writing for the points. I didn't catch that.
Rodrigo Silos.
Okay, gotcha. I see it now.
And I'm from Carrizo Springs.
Okay, Carrizo. And Laura's Carrizo,
Yes, sir.
right? And Liliana Garcia, Carrizo Springs.
Oh, it's Liliana Martinez.
Oh, so Iliana, then Liliana. So Liliana Martinez, where are you from?
I'm from Carrizo as well.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I think those are everybody has some pretty interesting points there. And I'd have to say that I agree with all of them. Okay. close this. Too many windows open. Let me narrow it down. Great. I closed my PowerPoint. All right. So let's just, while I'm opening it up, what do you think of the mule? Did you know what a mule is? Like, I'm sure we know what it is like when we look at it, but did you know the true definition of it?
Is it a mutt? Is that what it is?
I would not classify it as a mutt because it's actually, well, no, you know why you can't do that? I wouldn't call it a mutt because did you see how it's coming from? What are the two things? Where's it coming from?
A donkey and a horse.
Okay, there you go. So we're looking at two different species, right? In the terms of a mutt, and that's good that we're going to talk about that. What we consider mutt is where you have, in the case of, let's say, of a dog, an offspring within the same species that does not come from what is considered a pure breed parents. So those are the differences, purebred. So
I assumed it would be a mutt because the donkey and the horse are both part of the equine family.
they are, but now okay, good idea, sir. So let's say they are part of equine. Okay, let's go look up that. So equine, is that a genus or a species?
The first one. I don't know how to say it.
It's a genus?
Yes, a genus.
Okay, it's a
A genus.
genus. So that means that, let's make sure. Or is it family? Okay, here we go. It is a genus. So here we go. Right? So it is genus. That means that it is above species, is above species. However, a horse and a donkey is a species that, yes, derived from the genus. Now, remember, in the case of let's say, a weenie dog and a boxer, is the weenie dog and the boxer in the same genus, or are they same species?
They're the same species.
Yeah, and actually there's both. They fall into the same genus and they fall into the same species, right? So in that case, am I helping you understand the differences?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. And this is, I'm gonna be real honest, that's not my my cup of tea. I'm not into the I'm not real knowledgeable and big on species and genuses, and which is the field of taxonomy. I'm not a taxonomist, and it's something that I've never taken taxonomy. I think some of you know I'm not good with names. That is my Achilles heel. I stay away from that. And it's just not my cup of tea. So yeah, just letting you guys know. Okay.
But it would be like a hybrid, right?
Okay. Now we have to stop and go back to hybrid definition.
It's okay. We can continue.
No. Let's hold on. Darn it. Okay. And I'm going to use plants. It's good that we're having this conversation. So in the case of a hybrid, we're now getting into varieties of the same species, right? So again, in the case we were talking about we talked about the female horse and then the donkey. Now let's then go into a hybrid plant. So she's like, it's like a hybrid. So I would say no, it's not like a hybrid, and here's why. So if we are talking about a corn plant, the corn plant is of the same species. I believe what it's called maize, the Spanish term. And it's a species, it's a corn plant. However, there are different types or different varieties of a corn plant. So then if you cross-pollinate, that's what they're saying here, cross-pollinating two different plant varieties, which are of the same species. It's not saying, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go and get an apple and then cross it with a watermelon. That's not what we're talking about. It's not what we're talking about. So in this case, we're talking about a plant, corn plant, and then we do different varieties. And what do they mean by varieties? Okay, let's say one corn plant has the corn ears, and the corn ears are very, very wide and thick, but they're very short. And then you have another plant that has very thin and long corn ears. So you want that nice Thanksgiving picture corn ear and table, right? Tabletop picture. So then you cross-pollinate those two, and you're trying to select for having that nice corn ear that you can sell as a farmer for Thanksgiving. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. All right, so let us continue, ladies and gentlemen. What time does this class end? 11:20, right? Or
Yes.
sir.
11:20. Okay. Thanks. Thank you for Thank you for helping me keeping this schedule together. Let us go back to our PowerPoint. Okay, matter, anything that takes up space. Matter, anything that takes up space. So all matter, if you really kind of want to get specific, all matter is going to be made up of elements. Now, elements are substances, or you can call them atoms, and they cannot be broken down any further. So let's talk about this here. These are elements. These are elements. So if I give you a bar of gold, pure gold, and you cut it in half, and then you cut it in half, and you keep cutting the half till you reach the point where you can no longer cut the half into a half, you will find yourself at the atom of gold. But then if you keep going backwards and putting the halves together, you're adding more atoms and more atoms and more atoms, more atoms, more atoms. So for example, somebody's wearing a gold ring. We can say, and then someone is carrying around in their hand a large bar of gold, probably two hands because it's pretty heavy. They're carrying around the bar of gold. Then you could say, oh, look, that person carrying the bar of gold has way more atoms in there than the person wearing the ring that is gold. But it is, you can't, it is all made up of the same atoms. So that's what I'm trying to say, all made up, and it can't be broken down into a simpler form. Now we have, let's say in the case of water, H2O, that is not an element because we have more than one kind. But we can put elements together, an element like oxygen and an element like two hydrogens, and make water. But if we break up that water into its smallest components, we will be left with elements. If we break up you into your smallest bits of matter, we will find ourselves in elements. So again, this is an example of, let's say, a carbon atom. And on the outside here, we have the electrons. Inside here are protons and neutrons. Now remember, at the outermost part outside, that is where the bonding takes place. That is called your valence electrons. There may be electrons closer to the nucleus, but those are not involved in the bonding. It is only the electrons that are farthest from the nucleus that are involved in the game of chemistry. So, and we covered these concepts. P, protons, positively charged. Neutrons, I think of neutral. Think of a car on an even surface. If you put it in neutral, it is not moving, no charge. And electrons are negatively charged. And then we talked about electrons, Heisenberg uncertainty theory. We talked about the math in terms of energy signatures, being able to go through walls. If you can change your energy signature, electrons are always in motion. We never know its true position. All these things we've kind of already covered. So this is the basics of the atom. Now again, the atom, smallest unit of an element that still retains the property of an element. So when I gave you that example of cutting and cutting and cutting in halves and halves and halves and halves of that bar of gold, when you could no longer cut that in half, when you literally were left with two atoms left and you broke the two atoms apart, those two atoms are still gold, okay? Just because it's an atom doesn't mean that it is not the same property of that element. It is still an element, even at that small atom. It has those properties. Again, here's our nucleus, center, protons, neutrons. We talked about protons, we talked about electrons, we talked about neutrons. The atomic number, so what is that? It is the number of protons in an atom. So the number of protons is the atomic number. Here's some stuff that we want to just, since we're a little bit talking about life. Carbon is a key component or a key element found in living things. For example, it is the fourth most common element in the universe, second most common element in the human body. And here are one of the 6 elements that make up most of humans. So you have, and don't worry about percentages. I will not ask you about these percentages, but I would like you to know that in a multiple choice exam, which are the ones that are more common. So you would say, oh yeah, oxygen and carbon, and they kind of have it down in this percent scale right here. So, but no, I'm not going to ask you specifically what percent, but you should know what are the main elements found in living things, and specifically humans. All right, so we're going to briefly talk about about molecules and some bonding. So carbon is really unique. It's really unique and super cool because if you take a look at carbon, not in this part here, but on its valence or outermost shell, it has these 4 electrons. Well, it just so happens that these 4 electrons allow for bonding to occur, a nice bonding. Now you don't want to you can't get too close here, right? You can't get too close here. because you start invading the other, you start getting repulsion, because you remember that the same charges are going to pull away at one another. So it's just at the right length of space, actually. And there's a subject in chemistry that talks about space and shapes. It's called stereochemistry. So the stereochemistry of carbon is just so perfect that it allows for this nice uniform distribution within space for four things to bind in the case of hydrogen. Now, it is not always just for four. Sometimes it can bind to two. In the case of carbon dioxide, these are inorganic. These are not organic. Inorganic, so you have this double bond now versus a single bond. Here is oxygen and water, right, for H2O. Here is oxygen, H2. Remember, this is the one we breathe in. We breathe in O2. We do not breathe in just O. We call it oxygen, what we breathe. But there's another oxygen. There's just called one. I'm going to put this little hand over it. So let's just pretend it's just this one here. And I'm going to block it with this little hand. So yeah, that's not the one you want to breathe in, right? That's not the one we want to breathe in. And let's say we were to add another one here. So there's three of them. So there would be a little three here. Ozone, whew, that one we do not want to breathe in. Good for our atmosphere. Great for absorbing UVs, but not good to be breathing in. Let's take a look at this amazing sugar. Super important sugar. It is glucose, the most important of all the sugars. All your energy in terms of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is derived from this one molecule. So sugar is important for the brain, and oxygen is very important for the process to convert this into ATP. Now, when people are low or have a low blood sugar level, notice how they feel. A little disoriented, a little dizzy. There may be some slurring, or you can call it some inhibited speech pathology, and maybe trouble focusing. Their vision may be a little blurry. Well, sugar is very important, and that specific sugar for your brain. Your brain requires quite a bit of ATP to function properly. I remember they did a study in TAMU when I was in Texas A&M International, and they were doing just a volunteer random testing for blood sugar levels, and they were kind of shocked what they found. They found that a good percentage of the student body was low on sugar. So they're just not getting that sugar, that, you're right. And I think when you think about it, you think of a diet of a college student, at least from what I've seen, it's ramen noodles or any kind of ramen noodles. When you're living in dorm life, right? Like at home, it's a little more awesome because, man, you can write off your parents or whoever's like bringing in groceries. You can have other things, but really being in a dorm life or an apartment, typically college students do go stick with pizza, chicken nuggets, anything that you can just kind of pop in the oven real quick, or specifically microwave. So when you think about it, like, where's they probably weren't getting that much of the sugar unless they were going and getting some candy, and then they were getting that. Probably at the time that was their fruits, meaning apples, oranges. How many college students do you see hanging out at the produce section? Probably not many, right? They're not buying fruits. And also juices. Probably you're not seeing that many juices. So I don't know how it is now. I don't know if there's a trend more. I don't know if students are getting more sugars or not, but that was something that was noted I mentioned it because we're talking about glucose. This here is called a carbon backbone. A carbon backbone. And again, look how it's bonded. 1, 2, 3, 4. This carbon here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this carbon here, 1, 2, 3, 4. This carbon here, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So as you can see, it's just the nature of carbon. That's why it's super important. And that's everything we're talking about here. Is, again, now we're talking about covalent bonds. Let's briefly talk about a covalent bond. A covalent bond is the sharing of electrons, Let's see if we get into polar, non-polar. No, they don't, but I'll introduce it. So the sharing of electrons. If any of you have ever have children or seen a daycare or have nieces, nephews, little brothers, whatever, and they say, well, you need to share. So you have some candy in your little Halloween pumpkin, right? And you're like, well, you need to share with your sister, you need to share with your brother, or share something, right? This is just an example. So you have this pumpkin full of candy. What do? You dig into the pumpkin, right? You dig into that little pumpkin and you find the candies you do not like. And then you give it to your sibling and say, here you go. That's sharing. You can't deny it. I'm sure half of this class has done it at one point in time. You give someone the candies you don't like. It is still sharing. You can't fault the individual for it. It's still sharing. It's not equal sharing, but it's sharing unequally. So there's a type of covalent bond where you unequally share electrons. And remember, the bonding game is electrons. So you're sharing electrons, but unequally. That is called polar. Polar, P-O-L-O-R, polar covalent bond, P-O-L-A-R, polar covalent bond it's the unequal sharing of electrons. Here, I just briefly looked at your presentation. Your presentation doesn't mention that. It just says covalent. But reality is there's two types of covalent. The polar, the unequal sharing, and then now we're going to get into the other one called nonpolar. The nonpolar is the equal sharing of electrons. For example, parents say, hey, you need to share your candy, and that really nice little kid dumps out all the candies in his or her bed and literally divides them up. And let's just assume they're even numbers, so they get divided perfectly even. They're not odd numbers of candies. So boom. So 100 candies over here, 100 candies over here, and they're equally shared. That is called non-polar covalent bonding. Non-polar covalent bonding is the equal sharing of electrons. Okay. We are at our time, ladies and gentlemen.